When they got to the library, they found Basil talking with a group of elementary teachers and several printers regarding how many copies of the new books they should print. Casey signaled Basil that they were there, and then they made their way to the cafeteria for something to drink while they waited. It seemed like forever and a day before Basil came into the lunchroom. Casey said, "Sir, we need to talk to you, now." "Okay, come to my office." Once in his office, Corina made him sit down. "Sir, we weren't exactly honest with you about where we found the books." Basil had to slow Corina down as she told him about the dogs, the hall, and the keys. She described the sliding door that opened to the other side of the wheel. And then, as if it were an afterthought, she handed him the 2 books she brought with her. He opened one and thumbed through it, stopping to read a particular page. He shouted, "This is amazing." He leaned back in his big office chair while he stared at the 3. The office was too quiet for the longest time. Casey thought to himself, "We're in trouble now." Corina was thinking, "What a strange face Casey is making." Handel was engrossed in thought too. "I'm hungry. I hope Basil doesn't sit there all day like this. I need to eat." Nobody said anything until Handel's stomach growled. It was loud, and both Casey and Corina laughed at him, which broke the silence and caused Basil to speak up. "Are you hungry, Mr. Freeman?" "Kind of." "Me too." Instead of saying "let's get something to eat," Basil said, "Did you know our calendar was established by a man by the name of Ugo Boncompagni? He was the leader of what was called the Catholic Church in the year 1582. They gave him the title Pope Gregory XIII. So, it's called the Gregorian calendar after his title. It's all written in this book. The days of the week were named after planets in the same solar system as the Earth. Those planets were named after what they called Greek gods. The months were named after Roman gods. This information has been missing for a very long time. He realized by the blank stares he got that there wasn't too much interest in the room regarding calendars. He could almost envision a piece of apple pie sitting and spinning atop Handel's head. "I know this means nothing to you without knowing our full history." He lowered his head back into the book until his expression became confused and then frustrated as his brows fell down over his eyes. A moment later, Basil lifted his head and said, "I'm going to tell you something you didn't learn in school. Well, not secondary school, anyway, and not often spoken of outside a group of ancients. Although it will become part of your studies when you become historians. Because of this book, I will let you in on some of that history of the wheel you didn't know before. There was a dark time on board the wheel, just a little over 2400 years ago. It was called the time of the Zealots. Their zealots started with a group of students, one in particular by the name of Edrymachron, who discovered several ancient Greek religious books and a set of others regarding a movement back on Earth called the Nazi Party. He convinced the other 11 students they were Greek gods, and superior because of their blue eyes. When they became professors, they convinced the incoming students of the same thing, and so forth until all the ancients believed the same thing. After a time, they convinced almost 1/3 of the population of their deity. Casey asked, "How come we weren't told about this in school?" "It was a time we thought better to be forgotten. We didn't want to encourage future cults or macrons. So, when were we going to learn about this?" "I told you, once you become historians. But because of the books, I'm going to tell you now. Before the Zealots, there used to be another color of eyes on board. They were a golden color. At the beginning of their rule, a man by the name of Alexander Smooth stood up to the Zealots and nearly turned the people against them. Their Zealots found and killed him, and to intimidate the rest of the population from rebelling, they killed everyone with the golden eyes, often killing them at birth. They wiped out everyone with the gene that produced golden-eyed children." Corina said, "Now, I'm almost sorry we found the books. I can't imagine what that must have been like. I can stop if you like." She looked at Casey, and then at Basil. "No. I'll be okay." "All right." Edry learned the Nazis killed certain ethnic groups to establish themselves as a superior race, so he eliminated those with golden eyes. Students, those who followed him, comprised almost 20% of the population. The next thing they did, in order to cement their rule over the rest of the population, was to rewrite history and destroy our real history. They started with the calendar. They changed the names of the days and months to their names. If you were found with anything related to true history or the previous calendar, you were simply put to death. Along with all the golden-eyed citizens, they sent thousands of men, women, and children up the funeral tubes. People were murdered, even if they were overheard talking about it. That was a death sentence. Handel interrupted, "I'd fight back. There's no way I would let something like that happen." Didn't the people fight back? They tried without success. The rule of the Zealots continued for almost 250 years. That was long enough for certain parts of history to be forgotten and the newly revised history established. The whole structure of the wheel was centered around the Zealots, and the people treated them like gods. Handel spoke again. "That's a long time. I'm surprised that no one was able to stop them. Clearly, the Zealots were outnumbered." Handel: "I'm quite certain it was more complicated than just turning on them. But eventually, there was a rebellion, a mutiny, depending on your perspective. A group called the Light Society proved to the population the ancients were mere men like themselves, and everyone turned on them, killing all 48 ancients. Unfortunately, the Zealots were quite thorough at cleansing the history books. For decades after they were gone, the population used their names as the names of the days and months until a man by the name of Darren Roberts found a simple sheet of paper that had a picture of the actual calendar on it. That calendar included all the proper names of the days and months. It was just a simple piece of paper, but it corrected our calendar. Like I said, you'll learn more about them once you become historians, and there is so much more. And that's why these books are so important. They will go a long way in re-establishing our true history." Corina asked, "How do these books read about the Zealots? It seems to me the books were missing long before they were established, right? So, how is that possible?" "The book doesn't address the Zealots, but it does include a section about the Nazis, whom the Zealots imitated. Most, with exception of a few Zealot documents, were destroyed out of fear. Anything related to them will be kept out of the public schools." Corina responded, "I see." Basil mused how hard it should be for such young people to comprehend these things. It was a horrible time that he himself found difficult putting into perspective. His skin still crawls when he thinks of the books he read by those who survived. This book also contains all the missing data about Earth, and all the data that the Zealots destroyed. It includes the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, something called the Second Amendment, and other laws related to a free society. It includes the correct calendar where it came from, and every holiday celebrated on Earth before the Exodus. I know you probably didn't realize it, but this book will change so many things here on Wheel." Handel asked, "Does it say anything about the Blue Eyes? How is it that we have blue-eyed people today?" "When I was a first-year student, the senior elder told me that blue eyes were to prevent a war from breaking out on Wheel. Other than the Zealots, the concept has worked well for us." Both Casey and Corina were uncertain whether they wanted to study history now. The three of them continued to stare at Basil. He became curious about what they were thinking, but he said nothing for the moment. Then, he said, "Regarding the Zealots, you would never know they existed without the secret books and diaries we kept as a reminder of what they did." He didn't want to depress the students, so he changed the subject. "You said there are two sides to the wheel? Please explain that, and what's on the other side? How many more books did you find?" Corina answered, "Millions. Millions of books." Casey reminded him again about what Corina just told him, and what they found when they got to the other side. "Sir, I'm sure this is the most important find for the last 3,000 years. Corina interrupted, "We must tell the other ancients. They need to come with us and see for themselves. We can take them there right now." Casey said, "Sir, according to the writings we found, we have been in orbit around our destination for over 2,900 years. Again, Basil fell quiet. "All right, I'll contact the rest of the ancients and have them meet us in the conference room, Zeta. Will you be able to explain what you told me? Casey answered, yes. Once the other 45 ancients took their seats, Casey stood and walked to the front of the auditorium. He held the 2 books Corina brought with them and told them of their adventure. Some didn't believe them and thought it was a prank. Ancients weren't known to pull pranks, but Casey was new and didn't know all the rules yet. That was until Basil went to the front and confirmed the books were never seen before and contained information lost for generations, and how there were millions of other books. The rest of the discussion was about how to proceed. It was decided not to reveal anything they learned to the general public so as not to create a mass migration up top. Before the meeting was over, Basil suggested they all make their way up top and to the other side. There was no hesitation. All the ancients were ready to go. Handel laughed when most of the blue eyes couldn't see, even with the dark glasses. They followed closely behind Corina, Casey, and Handel to make their way, until they entered the hall, where their eyes were able to focus. Casey led them through the different procedures to get through to the other side. Fortunately, the dome was dusk-like, which made it easy for them to see. There were a few lights on here and there, directed at one thing or another, but mostly revealing the interior wall. Once through, Handel directed them to a section along the wall where he found the writings and schematics of the wheel. Corina took another group to review the different tubes. The tubes were the most interesting. One tube held strange crafts that looked like large balls, and another was empty, but with each tube was a manual. Each manual explained what the specific tube held. One ancient found a tube with several dozen large crafts inside, placed one behind another, and lined up from the floor to the field up top. He looked but could not find an entrance into the tube. The one he was looking at contained contraptions called portable sawmills. He asked, out loud, "What's a portable sawmill?" No one knew or answered. He found the manual and learned they were built for cutting wood in the proper shapes, called domestic cuts, for building structures like big wooden boxes called houses, sheds, wooden bridges. House? I've never seen a real house. As he was reading the manual, he noticed a red button on a panel on the side of the tube. He pushed the button, expecting it to open an entryway. Instead, all the crafts shot out through the field and towards the planet. Everyone stopped to watch them disappear into the distance, and then everyone turned to stare at the young professor who stood still, dumbfounded. Basil said, "All right, don't push any more buttons until we know what they're for, okay?" The group returned to looking at the different items within. They were so engrossed they didn't notice the sun rising from the other side of the planet. It became warm quickly, much warmer than the other side of the wheel. One professor said it was like a hot bath. Most couldn't see because of the sun's brightness, and several needed help to make their way back to the entryway. There were thousands of outbuildings scattered across the deck, and another professor discovered the small boxes next to each door, which held 2-pronged keys. Casey explained to the group that the keys were like tuning forks, and when struck, they would open a particular door or several doors. The outbuildings were full of books and other materials. Most only guessed what they found, but no one was sure what anything was. One room was full of tents. That's what the manual said, anyway. 2 ancients took refuge in that room to hide from the sun and read the instruction manuals about tents and how to use them. Basil said to Casey and the other 2, "I think we're right not to tell the citizens about what we've found here, at least not before we figure out what all of this stuff is. I'm certain it would turn out too dangerous for everyone. Don't you agree?" The 3 of them agreed. 2 historians by the names of Sarah Ogden and Char House approached Basil. Char said, "Look what we found." Sarah pulled a device from a box she was holding and handed it to Basil. He inspected it and said, "Well, these are communication devices, right?" "That's correct." She turned and pointed to another compartment and said, "That compartment contains thousands of them." She handed him a thin 8x11 manual. This manual explains how they work. It also talks about 8 devices called communication satellites. They are in the tube, just the other side of the compartment. Basil began reading the manual. It said the small devices were called satellite phones, or sat phones. Printed on the bottom of each phone was a 7-digit number. When you turn one on and press the number on one of the other devices, that other device makes a musical sound. The person with that device pushes a button to answer the call, and then the two can communicate with one another. He said, "These are very much like the handhelds we use on board, only obsolete. Why do we need them and how are they better or different from the ones we already have?" Char answered, "The manual says that these are meant for long-distance communications. Once we're on the planet, they will be very important." She pointed out the tube on the other side of the compartment. Those are the communication satellites. There are 8 of them, and when released from the dome, 2 take up positions, directly at the north and south poles. The other 6 take up positions equally around the whole planet. Once in place, they become a planet-wide communication system. I do not intend to be redundant, but these devices can be used to communicate from anywhere around the planet. He turned one on and spoke into it. "Hello, hello." Char looked at Basil as if he didn't hear a thing either one of them said. "Sir, you need the satellites in place before they will work. You'll have to stick with the handhelds until we launch the satellites." Basil stared at her and asked, "How do we launch them?" Char walked over to the tube and pressed a red button. Right afterward, there were several loud booms. Everyone took off running. With 8 loud popping sounds, each satellite was ejected from the dome. Then it became quiet. Basil said, "Didn't you hear what I just said?" She answered, Yes I did. It needed to be done." Basil asked, "Now what?" "The satellites should automatically position themselves, and should be operational within 2 days. Also, the compartment that stored all the sat phones also contains all the necessary electronic equipment to monitor and control the satellites." Basil asked, "Do either of you want to take up residence in this compartment and track the satellites? Or, do you want to find someone else more suited for doing so?" Sarah offered to take control of the satellite system and report back to Basil once it was fully operational. He handed the phone he was holding back to Sarah. "It will be nice if this works out." When the conversation ended, they came out to find the sun had risen and was too warm for those who could not acclimate to its brightness and warmth. It forced most to leave. Any temperature over 75 degrees was unnaturally warm for the travelers. Sarah and Char stayed behind in the satellite control room and said they would contact Basil on a handheld when the light and temperature became acceptable. Once back at the library, Basil gave everyone a handheld, saying, "I set these communication devices on a different frequency than we generally use. We've done that so we can keep communications between us confidential." Before they left, he said he would contact them when it was safe to return to the dome, which is what they now call the other side of the wheel. 3 hours later, Basil called each person and told them they would return later that same night. Based on information he received from Char, it would be approximately 6 more hours before the planet's sun would be out of the way so they could return. It was meat night, so Casey invited Corina to his parents for dinner. His mother agreed to make meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Casey and Corina were becoming inseparable, spending long hours every day together since they accepted the student project from Basil. Now, with their discovery, they would spend even more time together. That night, Casey's mom invited Eric, his new wife Chili, Jake, and his new wife, Annika, for dinner, too. Both of Casey's friends had a whirlwind romance and were married within weeks of leaving school. They didn't even bother to invite Casey to their weddings, but that wasn't unusual on board Wheel. What was his mother trying to tell him? Once they sat to eat, Eric asked Casey, "What's going on? I've heard rumors about you finding more books. Did you find more books?" "All right, I'll tell you a secret, but you can't leak one word. I was going to just tell my mom, but since she invited you over, I will tell only this group here." Corina put her hand on Casey's shoulder, as if to let him know he should keep quiet. Then she said, "We found a whole other side of the wheel and a planet. That's where we have been for the last few days, with the other ancients trying to figure out how we get off this craft and down onto the planet we're orbiting, right, Casey?" "Well, I was planning to say we found 2 more books, But I guess there will be a big announcement soon. If you tell anyone, you could create a panic that could hurt many people. Until we figure out how to get off this craft in an orderly manner, we should keep it quiet, to avoid a mass panic. Jake said, right. You expect us to believe you? Why haven't we been told to prepare for disembarking? I don't think the elders would keep a thing like that quiet, not after all this time in space. Corrina, I'm surprised that you would tell us such an incredible story. You found 2 more books, eh? Yes, we found 2 more books. Didn't we even fool you a little? No. I've known you too long for you to fool me that easily. Well, I haven't known Corrina that long, but the story is just too far-fetched. What were the books about? The history of the Earth. The Elder Ancient believes they might be copies of books destroyed in the fire. Eric asked, how did you discover those books and didn't invite us to go with you? We found them while doing our research project. It requires us to go up top to finish it. That's how come I haven't invited you. Would they let you leave work to go exploring up top? I'm sure they wouldn't. Okay, I guess it makes sense. They finished dinner and went for a walk in the park. It was always a beautiful night to go walking in any of the parks with their artificial moons and stars. They passed several people standing in different sitting areas playing musical instruments, mostly guitars, and singing. Corrina asked, who are these people? What are they doing? Annika answered, they're buskers. What are buskers? Casey answered, Tan told me about them. They stand around and play instruments and sing. It used to be a big deal back on Earth, in a place called Dublin, Ireland. Corrina said, well, some of them need music lessons, and some of the others cannot sing at all. Although some others sound pretty good. As they walked, Casey reached over and grabbed her hand. It was official. They were a couple now. As the 6 of them walked, Basil's voice came over Casey and Corrina's handheld radios. The coast is clear to return to the dome. Both Eric and Jake looked at Casey. Eric asked, what was that? Who was that? Casey answered, sometimes reality is so different from what we're told, and we just can't believe the truth. If you like, you're welcome to come with us and find out what the coast is clear means. The 6 of them made their way to the cliffs. They were the first to get there. The ancients were having problems with the sunlight again. Handel was waiting outside the entrance when they arrived. Hi, Casey. Who are these people? These are my best friends, Eric, Jake, and their wives. I couldn't leave them behind. As they passed through the doors, Casey's friends freaked out. While they were freaking out, Corrina pulled on Casey's arm and whispered. Casey, the dogs, they're just down to the right against the wall. He looked to see them just as they took off running. Casey asked Handel to show his friends around. The look he gave Handel caused him to comply without asking questions. Corrina and Casey followed the dogs to a broken tube. Within the tube were hundreds of different pods containing dogs in suspended animation, concatenated one next to another from the floor to the outer shield. Each pod held dozens of the animals of all different sizes. There must have been thousands of them in the pods. A compartment behind the tube had a sign over it that said, Domestic Animal Food and Supplies. According to the manual, the animals weren't supposed to be released until they were situated on the planet. The manual called them pets and said they needed humans to survive. It went into detail about how to maintain the animals. It appeared a rock broke the pod the 2 dogs were in. Within that same pod were the dead bodies and skeletons of another dozen. They didn't survive the impact of the space debris. As they stood there looking, the 2 animals came out from under the tube. Both stood in front of the couple, and this time wagged their tails. Corrina said, according to the book, when they wag their tail, it means they're friendly. Corrina, look how skinny they are. They must be starving. Casey reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of jerky. Why are you carrying jerky in your pocket? I don't know. I just grabbed it when we left my parents' compartment. I planned to eat it later before I went to bed. He tore the jerky in half and gave a piece to each of the dogs. They ravaged it as they continued to wag their tails. Corina said, "They are so hungry. Now the book says you should kneel and pet their heads." "What does that mean?" Corina kneeled and reached out to put her hand on top of their heads. Both dogs rushed toward her and licked her all over her face. "That means they like you." "Yuck, I'm not kneeling down." "It's not bad. I kind of like it. You could learn something from them, I'm sure. Anyway, we need to find food for them. I don't think it would be wise to open the tube containing the dog food until we're on the planet, so we need to find them something else to eat." "Do we need to lead them to another one of your dad's calves?" "Oh, they didn't kill that calf. It was born deformed and died of natural causes. Mom said it was already dead before these two got to it. She suspected they smelled it and were hungry. You know, according to the book, they can smell 10,000 times better than we can." "No way. What if Handel farted a really stinky fart?" "Casey. That's disgusting." "Well, can you imagine what it must be like if you could smell that good?" Corina shook her head and turned back to the dogs. "They call these dogs chocolate labs. They're beautiful, aren't they?" "Yes, they're amazing." Casey kneeled down and patted one on the head as it licked both his cheeks. Corina said again, "We need to find food for them. Look, their ribs are sticking out. They're starving." As they left, the dogs followed. When they got back to the group, everyone kneeled as Corina instructed them and petted the pups. After a few minutes, she left with the dogs to take them to her father's keep to find them something to eat. Perhaps her mother knew what to do with them. Casey said, "Well, what do you guys think? Did you believe we were kidding now? Jake? Eric? You know me so well. Was I lying to you?" Both fumbled to answer him. Before they finished groveling, the ancients began arriving. Basil questioned Casey about bringing his friends to the other side, but the negativity would do no good since they were already there. The sun was high, and they were out of its direct path. Although the ancients found their way around, the lighting was now almost too dim. Jake, of all people, whose father was an engineer and electrician, noticed a light switch panel on the wall as they walked in. It seemed no one else saw it. He walked over and set it to the on position. When he flipped the switch, the whole place lit up, all the tubes, all the stairs, platforms with their railings, all the doorways, and even the floor. Some smart, knowledgeable ancients ran back through the entrance. Apparently, the lights scared them, so they ran. Everyone looked at Jake. Basil thanked him for turning on the lights. Basil gathered them into a small open space. "After our friend Jake turned the lights on for us, I had an epiphany. We will need the engineers, electricians, and other skilled professions to help us figure this out. I realized most ancients could perform those tasks, but we're bookworms. That's why we need to contact persons in those professions to help us. We need to do this, and we need to do it right." Everyone agreed. Basil asked one of the professors to find those individuals who excelled in the various professional crafts. One ancient by the name of Hector found another box of keys, like the two-pronged keys that opened all the exterior doors. They were a different color and glowed when they held them. There was a red key that was different from all the others. Basil bent down and struck it against the floor. When he did, it played several notes. Once it stopped, they heard the same notes coming from a large outbuilding 50 feet away. The building was designed differently than the other buildings surrounding it. After entering, they found it contained thousands of books, and a sign hung on the back wall that said, "The Ancient Library." After 15 minutes of inspection, Basil and Hector concluded the library was for the first and second generation of the ancients. It contained instructions about exiting the craft. It contained books on government and social structure, once everyone moved to the planet. They realized these were editions of the books lost in the fire. Basil sent Hector to gather the other 46 ancients to meet in the library. An hour later, Basil stood up in front of the group to give explanations and instructions on how they should proceed. "Ladies and gentlemen, This library is probably the most essential compartment on board Wheel right now. It contains all the information we need to make our exit from Wheel and establish ourselves as a society on the new planet. This is the information we have been missing since leaving Earth. Unfortunately for you professors and students, the Book of Instruction states that it is information reserved for the historians and the elders. Those two groups will need to stay here and research. The other two groups will lead the different efforts exploring the rest of the dome and monitoring the professionals. One student stood up and asked, "How soon will we be leaving the Wheel?" "I don't know yet. I understand we need to establish ourselves on the planet, but again, we need to do it in an orderly fashion. If life had gone as it was supposed to, the historians and the elders would already have spent most of our lives researching these books. So, before we do anything rash, give us a few days to find out what we have here in this library. One last item, Casey Hill and Corina Freeman will be my liaisons until further notice. If you have requests or needs, please take it up with them. They have my full backing." Basil appointed the professors to supervise the work and workloads of the professionals once they arrived. He appointed the rest of the students, who were already exploring the dome, to inspect the full length of the library hall that surrounded the whole of the dome. They were to catalog its contents. They weren't necessarily happy about that, but complied. Casey approached Basil. "Are you sure you want to put us in that position?" "Yes, Casey. I need you to keep me apprised of our progress. I can't think of anyone better suited than you two. Don't be intimidated." "Yes, sir." "What about Handel? I know he's not an ancient, but he's every bit as responsible for finding this place as Corina or I." "You're right. He can act as a liaison alongside you and Corina." First thing, Handel, who did not understand hierarchy, and being a keeper's son, took it upon himself to boss everyone around. After an hour, Casey confronted him. He settled down afterward. The next day, two other students, Grant Hughes and Elizabeth Forsyth, approached Casey. They explained while they were exploring the dome before they were assigned to the halls, they found a central command center right in the middle, about 9 miles away. "You walked 9 miles and back in one day?" Grant pointed to a small vehicle and said, "No. We took that cart." He directed Casey's attention to all the paths stretching out in every direction and said, "Those aren't walking paths, they're roads. They go everywhere in the dome. We found the carts on the edge of the dome half a mile over that way." He pointed to where they found them. "I should have expected that. Do the rest of the students know about the carts?" "Yes." "Okay, tell me about the dome. How do you know it's the command center?" Elizabeth answered, "I guess the sign over the entrance was a dead giveaway." She stared at Casey, smiling. "All right, clever girl. Did you go inside?" "No, we just recorded what it was and its location. We moved on, but thought we should mention it to you, assuming that at some point, it might become important." Casey was just a little dumbfounded by their innocent and laid-back attitude. Casey thanked them and said he was sorry that Basil pulled them from exploring. He explained, "Basil believes any information we find in books or manuals is most important right now. We'll get back to exploring once he's confident that we have learned enough to move to the planet. That's our first priority. If we're here too long, the rest of the Wheel will find out, and chaos will rule the day." The two reluctantly went to the halls. He thought to himself how this was all going to work out. Elizabeth and Grant were no more than kids like himself. When did he become such an adult? As he walked around, observing the different groups, Corina found him. She ran and hugged him. He asked, "Where are the dogs?" "My mom has them." They took to her immediately. "She's feeding them." "What are you doing?" "I'm not sure yet. I don't know what else to do other than look around." "Oh, you, Handel, and I are liaisons for Basil. We are to observe and report to him. Everyone answers to us. What do you think of that? Can you handle it?" "No pun intended." "I don't know what that means, but okay, I can handle that, pun intended." While Basil and the other elders were hiding in the library, the professors were exploring the rest of the dome, except for one professor, William Hanson, who was contacting the best skilled workers in the industrial professions. 1 week later, and before anyone else was told about the dome, Casey asked William to have all those professionals meet in the library conference room, ZEDA. That group included Jake's dad and Casey's dad. Everyone else who knew about the dome came to the meeting. Once they assembled, Casey stood and spoke. First, he asked them to keep what he told them quiet. If anyone can't do so, please let us know now, and we can excuse you. No one spoke. He explained what has taken place over the last couple of weeks. The dogs, the doors, the dome side of the wheel, and what they found so far, and finally the planet. William, the professor who was assigned to induct the different professionals, asked, Casey, has anyone figured out why the dome is so much more advanced than the living side of wheel? Why were we living in such a backward society on this side? Casey answered, that's an odd question. Basil stood and said, I can answer that, William. I found a book in the ancient library that tells us precisely that. The book was called Reason. I don't know why it was called that, but it explained that very thing. Let me refresh your memories. Wheel was sent out from the Earth in the year 2497. In order to survive, we had to leave because the core of the Earth was cooling, and once it cooled, its mass would become too dense to hold orbit, causing it to plunge into the sun. A scientist by the name of Severson discovered that in the year 2410. The cooling was caused by draining 3 large bodies of water called oceans. Severson estimated that they had until the year 2510 before the Earth was swallowed by the sun. That gave Earth almost 100 years to send out 1,000 arcs, Wheel 17 being arc number 974. Earth knew there were thousands of habitable planets throughout the different solar systems, so they sent us out to start over, and here we are 3,000 years later. I'm sure most of you remember that from your school days. I remember all of that, but that doesn't answer my question. I know it doesn't, but I'm getting there. Earth established these ships based on an old 22nd century article, in a technology magazine, written by a man named Daniel Baechlaw. Baechlaw pointed out the fact that man had become so advanced in technology that he could no longer survive as he did thousands, even hundreds of years prior without it. Everything was provided for him, and should the technology fail, man would follow soon afterward. Because of that article, and another science fiction book written in the 21st century, the builders designed the ships in 2 major sections, the living side and the dome. The living side was designed to teach us how to grow crops and animal products on our own to make us self-sufficient. Otherwise, we could never survive on our new planet. Although the technology all around us was still providing for us, such as air, heat, water filtration, we had to fend for ourselves to eat and live, which required human effort. Now, the dome has all the advancements of the 25th century. It's also necessary for our survival. Although we have yet to figure that all out, and I promise the technology will baffle even the most intelligent among us. The dome is vital because we need it to land, but once we're on the planet, we can survive without it. William asked, is that the plan? Are we going to discard it once we're on the planet? Of course not, I'm just saying we can survive without it. I have no intention of doing away with it. We haven't scratched the surface of what this dome can do for us, or the technology it can provide us. We will keep it. After the meeting, they decided that everyone should meet the next morning, on Thursday, at 8 a.m. and return to the dome.